Hello everyone. So this is a very short talk I'm doing on, I've got a lot to do today as regards recording during the day, so on different sites. So I'll start off with a very short talk on the inspirational writings of HP Blavatsky. Now HP Blavatsky wrote on many different subjects, providing a spiritual dimension to them all, and thereby helping us to gain a wider view of the world that we live in and the worlds beyond. Scattered through her writings and articles are many highly inspirational teachings which discourage the idea that Theosophy is far too intellectual and provides no real food for the intuition. Besides the wonderful voice of the silence, the secret doctrine and Isis unveiled, it is worth perusing her many articles to find hidden gems that illuminate our minds and souls. So this talk will contain little of my own words, but consists mainly of a very few hidden gems from these articles. So the first is from the article The New Cycle, which was the opening article in a new magazine, La Revue Theosophique, in March 1889. In this, HPB gives encouragement to the aspirant in these words: "This spirit is a force that cannot be either checked or stopped. Those who recognise it and feel that this is the supreme moment of their salvation will be carried by it beyond the illusions of the great astral serpent. The bliss they will experience will be so sharp and so keen that were they not in spirit detached from their bodies of flesh, this beatitude would wound them like a sharpened blade. It is not pleasure that they will feel, but a bliss, which is a foretaste of the wisdom of the gods, of the knowledge of good and evil, and of the fruits of the tree of life." So later on in the same article, she continues this theme. "No one is so busy or so poor that he cannot be inspired by a noble ideal to follow. Why hesitate to blaze a trail towards that ideal, through all obstacles, all hindrances, all the daily considerations of social life, and to advance boldly until it is reached? Ah, those who would make this effort would soon find that the narrow gate and the thorny path lead to spacious valleys with unlimited horizons, to a state without death, for one re-becomes a god. It is true that the first requisites for getting there are absolute unselfishness and unlimited devotion to the interests of others, and complete indifference as to the world and its opinions. To take the first step on this ideal path requires a perfectly pure motive. No frivolous thought must be allowed to divert our eyes from the goal. No hesitation, no doubt must fetter our feet. Yet there are men and women perfectly capable of all this, and whose only desire is to live under the aegis of their divine nature. Let these at least have the courage to live this life and not to hide it from the sight of others. No one's opinion could ever be above the rulings of our own conscience. So let that conscience, arrived at its highest development, be our guide in all our common tasks, daily tasks. As to our inner life, let us concentrate all our attention on our chosen ideal. Let us ever look beyond without ever casting a glance at the mud at our feet. Those capable of such an effort are true Theosophists. All others are but members more or less indifferent, and quite often useless." So H.P. Blavatsky was no sectarian and taught us to see the wider picture and recognise that the theosophical life had little to do with the membership of any society, but everything to do with the way we live our lives. In an article entitled The Cycle Moveth, from Lucifer, March 1890, she writes that thousands of men and women who belong to no church, sect or society, who are neither Theosophists nor spiritualists, are yet virtually members of that silent brotherhood, the units of which often do not know each other. Belonging as they do to nations far and wide apart, yet each of whom carries on his brow the mark of the mysterious karmic seal, the seal that makes of him or her a member of the brotherhood of the elective thought. Having failed to satisfy their aspirations in their respective orthodox faiths, they have severed themselves from their churches in soul when not in body, and are devoting the rest of their lives to the worship of loftier and purer ideals than any intellectual speculation can give. How few in comparison to their numbers, and how rarely one meets with such, and yet their name is legion, if they only chose to reveal themselves. It's a really brilliant little section. In fact, I'll read it again. Thousands of men and women who belong to no church, sect or society, who are neither Theosophists nor spiritualists, are yet virtually members of that silent brotherhood, the units of which often do not know each other, belonging as they do to nations far and wide apart, yet each of whom carries on his brow the mark of the mysterious karmic seal, the seal that makes of him or her a member of the brotherhood of the elective thought. Having failed to satisfy their aspirations in their respective orthodox faiths, they have severed themselves from their churches in soul when not in body, and are devoting the rest of their lives to the worship of loftier and purer ideals than any intellectual speculation can give to them. How few in comparison to their numbers, and how rarely one meets with such, and yet their name is legion, if they only chose to reveal themselves. So she taught us that only by developing our intuitions and by our own self-induced and self-devised efforts could we make any real progress. As she states in the article What is Truth? From Lucifer, February 1888, in every age there have been sages who had mastered the absolute and yet could teach but relative truths. For none yet born of mortal woman in our race has or could have given out the whole and the final truth to another man. For every one of us has to find that, to him, final knowledge in himself. As no two minds can be absolutely alike, each has to receive the supreme illumination through itself, according to its capacity, and from no human light. The greatest adept living can reveal of the universal truth only so much as the mind he is impressing it upon can assimilate it, and no more. Tot homines quod sentantia, which I don't know what that means, is an immortal truism. The sun is one, but its beams are numberless, and the effects produced are beneficent or maleficent according to the nature and constitution of the objects they shine upon. Polarity is universal, but the polarizer lies in our own consciousness. In proportion as our consciousness is elevated towards absolute truth, so do we men assimilate it more or less absolutely. But man's consciousness, again, is only the sunflower of the earth. Longing for the warm ray, the plant can only turn to the sun and move round and round in following the course of the unreachable luminary. Its roots keep it fast to the soil, and half its life is passed in the shadow. Still, each of us can relatively reach the sun of truth, even on this earth, and assimilate its warmest and most direct rays, however differentiated they may become after their long journey through the physical particles in space. To achieve this, there are two methods. On the physical plane, we may use our mental polariscope and, analysing the properties of each ray, choose the purest. On the plane of spirituality, to reach the sun of truth, we must work in dead earnest for the development of our higher nature. We know that by paralysing gradually within ourselves the appetites of the lower personality, and thereby deadening the voice of the purely physiological mind, that mind which depends upon and is inseparable from its medium or vehicle, the organic brain, the animal man in us may make room for the spiritual, and once aroused from its latent state, the highest spiritual senses and perceptions grow in us in proportion and develop pari passu with the divine man. This is what the great adepts, the yogis in the East and the mystics in the West, have always done and are still doing. And again, what are the Theosophists? An article from the Theosophist, October 1879. Be what he may, once that a student abandons the old and trodden highway of routine and enters upon the solitary path of independent thought, Godward, is a Theosophist, an original thinker, a seeker after the eternal truth, with an inspiration of his own to solve the universal problems. Again, I'll repeat that again. Be what he may, once that a student abandons the old and trodden highway of routine and enters upon the solitary path of independent thought, Godward, he is a Theosophist, an original thinker, a seeker after the eternal truth, and with an inspiration of his own to solve the universal problem. Of course, at the very beginning, the Theosophical Masters had stated that they wanted a brotherhood of humanity, a real universal fraternity started. And this is the main theme that runs through all of HPB's writings. And one such reference to this comes from The Beacon Light of Truth, from La Revue Theosophique, May 1889. I say it again, it is only Theosophy well understood that can save the world from despair by reproducing social and religious reform, a task once before accomplished in history by Gautama the Buddha. A peaceful reform, without one drop of blood spilt, each one remaining in the faith of his fathers if he so chooses. To do this, he will only have to reject the parasitic plants of human fabrication, which at the present moment are choking all religions and churches in the world. Let him accept but the essence, which is the same in all. That is to say, the spirit which gives life to man, in whom it resides, and renders him immortal. Let every man incline to go on to find his ideal, a star before him to guide him. Let him follow it without ever deviating from his path, and he is almost certain to reach the next page. The beacon light of life, the truth, no matter whether he seeks for it and finds it at the bottom of a cradle or of a well. So in this society, Theosophy is needed more than ever. It is certainly not the time to become complacent or to imagine that times have changed and Theosophy is no longer as valid in the modern world. In the article, Our Cycle and the Next, Lucifer, May 1889, she warns that if Theosophy prevailing in the struggle, its all-embracing philosophy, strikes deep root into the minds and hearts of men, if its doctrines of reincarnation and karma, in other words of hope and responsibility, find a home in the lives of the new generations, then indeed will dawn the day of joy and gladness for all who now suffer and are outcast. For real Theosophy is altruism, and we cannot repeat it too often. It is brotherly love, mutual help, unswerving devotion to truth. If once men do but realise that in these alone can true happiness be found, and never in wealth, possessions, or any selfish gratification, then the dark clouds will roll away and a new humanity will be born upon earth. Then the golden age will be there indeed. But then she adds a little note which says, but if not, then the storm will burst, and our boasted Western civilization and enlightenment will sink in such a sea of horror that its parallel history as never yet recorded. And maybe that's happened with what's going on with the world wars and what's going on at the moment. People just didn't listen to the message of brotherhood. And it is easy to see that humanity did not heed the warning, and it can be argued that we are indeed immersed in this sea of horror at this moment in time, in the wake of 2 world wars, countless conflicts throughout the world, and the increase in selfishness and immorality throughout society. But also the encouragement in the above quotation rings clear as well, and Theosophy still needs to prevail in the struggle. Prevail in the struggle. It's very important. And there's much work to do in the world, whether through the Theosophical movement in general or similar organisations and individuals. Remember what I said earlier about not everybody, probably most Theosophists are outside of the society. It's how one lives and how one acts and how one conducts himself in life that makes him a Theosophist. We must not become complacent or overwhelmed by the seemingly insurmountable odds, but realise that all the problems arise in the realm of passing illusions, and the spiritual is untouched by all this seeming chaos. In the first of her 5 messages to the American conventions in 1888, HPB writes, "Many who have never heard of the society are Theosophists, without knowing it themselves. For the essence of Theosophy is the perfect harmonising of the divine with the human in man, the adjustment of his godlike qualities and aspirations, and their sway over the terrestrial or animal passions in him. Kindness, absence of every ill feeling or selfishness, charity, goodwill to all beings, and perfect justice to others as to oneself are its chief features. He who teaches Theosophy preaches the gospel of goodwill, and the converse of this is true also. He who preaches the gospel of goodwill teaches Theosophy." So universal brotherhood will never come about as a result of cold diplomatic reasoning or through political manifestos. HPB makes this clear later in the same message. "I am confident that when the real nature of Theosophy is understood, the prejudice against it, now so unfortunately prevalent, will die out. Theosophists are of necessity the friends of all movements in the world, whether intellectual or simply practical, for the amelioration of the condition of mankind. We are the friends of those who fight against drunkenness, against cruelty to animals, against injustice to women, against corruption in society or in government, although we do not meddle in politics. We are the friends of those who exercise practical charity, who seek to lift a little of the tremendous weight of the misery that is crushing down the poor. But in our quality of Theosophists, we cannot engage in any of these great works in particular. As individuals we may do so, but as Theosophists we have a larger, more important and much more difficult work to do. People say that Theosophists should show what is in them, that the tree is known by its fruit. Let them build dwellings for the poor, it is said. Let them open soup kitchens, etc., etc. And the world will believe that there is something in Theosophy. These good people forget that Theosophists as such are poor. At any rate, the humble writer of these lines has no property of her own and has to work hard for her daily bread whenever she finds time from her theosophical duties. The function of Theosophists is to open men's hearts and understanding to charity, justice and generosity, attributes which belong specifically to the human kingdom and are natural to man when he has developed the qualities of a human being. Theosophy teaches the animal man to be a human man. And when people have learnt to think and feel as truly human beings should feel and think, they will act humanely, and works of charity, justice and generosity will be done spontaneously by all. So it is this becoming truly human that it is the basis of all true theosophical teaching. It is something that HPB emphasised in all her works. as the Masters of Wisdom tell us, as I said earlier, and this is probably the most important message I think that we Theosophists can, or anyone can take in, and it's the chiefs want a brotherhood of humanity, a real universal fraternity started. This should be the aim and inspiration of us all in the Theosophical movement in general, just as much as it was in those earlier days. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you soon.